Lifeboat, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, came out in 1944. On arrival, it was one of his most controversial films ever at the time, and as a result, it wasn't very much advertised, didn't make a lot of money, but has since garnered a lot of praise. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Golden Hour Film Podcast. Yes, you can probably tell from the YouTube video, but if you can't already tell from the audio, which I don't know how you would be able to, I am flying solo this week. Yes, it should be a one-off occasion. Unfortunately, something came up last minute for Shane where he can't record. Hopefully for next week's episode Shane will be here, but I can say that if Shane can't, I will try my best to organise someone to come in. I don't know who. We'll get something. You don't have to listen to my voice alone 2 weeks in a row, I promise. Unless you want that. I can't imagine you do. Anyway, all the support as of late has been great. And yes, we announced the Euros. Yes, I'm wearing my Italy jersey because I just did the draw. And yeah, there's some tasty ties in there. And the only way that you can get involved in that, well, actually, it's kind of entirely up to you. Because you guys decide who wins each match, who goes through the round of 16 and then the quarters and then the semis, and then who wins it all. How do you vote? It's pretty easy. You kind of get 2 votes actually, because we'll put the matches up on YouTube and you just click on the winner. And same with our Instagram stories. You just tap which film you think should win. And whichever one gets the most votes across the 2 platforms combined goes through. It's pretty simple. And if you are listening or watching and wondering how you can support this podcast in any way, shape or form, it's pretty simple actually. If you're watching, any likes on the video really are appreciated, and especially any comments are great. And give it a listen the whole way through. If you can, that would be amazing. As far as Spotify or Amazon or whatever goes, not Apple Podcasts, burn them to the ground. It's pretty simple. Drop a 5-star review if you can. We've got a couple, and by a couple I mean 2 5-star reviews on Spotify. Let's up that. Let's get loads of reviews on Spotify. Links to everything is in the description if you want to help us out. And yeah, I really appreciate it. As far as Lifeboat goes, yeah, I said it in the intro, it was a pretty controversial film at the time. It's an adaptation of a John Steinbeck novella. He was a pretty big deal at the time. And even John Steinbeck himself tried to distance himself from the film. Why? Well, because at the time, people thought that it was too generous to the portrayal of the German characters, because, we're in World War II and everybody's a little bit shaken up by it. And yeah, it garnered all sorts of backlash as a result of a couple of things. So Canada Lee plays a character in this, an African-American character, and the NAACP thought it was far too stereotypical. Canada Lee himself said he tried to cut out some of the racial stereotype dialogue that his character was given. But, the character is the character. They didn't like it. I don't know if he particularly liked it. He was also a professional boxer, fun fact. 42 wins, I think, or 47 wins. I don't know. He won a lot of fights and a lot of them by knockout. I think it might be 47 wins, 42 by knockout. I don't know. And he was a jockey. But if we're talking stars of the film, it is very much the Tallulah Bankhead show. And it's her first film since 1932. It's her first film in 12 years. She got a fair wad of cash, at the time anyway, of $75,000 for her work, which this day and age is like, it's over $1 million anyway, which goes a long way back then. So she is very much the star of the show. She actually caught pneumonia during the film. There was a lot of onset injuries because Hitchcock needed that realism. So they were in a boat that was constantly moving in a tank in the studio. And yeah, she got pneumonia at one point because they were constantly getting buckets of water thrown at them. But to apologize, Hitchcock gave her a puppy, which he allegedly named after himself before giving to her, which is kind of funny. It's pretty Hitchcock, actually. It's Hitchcock's only collaboration with 20th Century Fox. He also got an Oscar nom for Best Director. It also got Oscar nominations for Best Original Story, which, I don't know, maybe because Steinbeck distanced himself, that's how that works. And it also got nominated for Best Cinematography, black and white that is. It was shot by Glenn McWilliams, who also did another Hitchcock film years before, Waltzes from Vienna, which was like the early 30s. I haven't seen it. Doesn't sound particularly good, but I am a completionist when it comes to films, so I will probably watch it at some point. The film had plenty of criticism due to its portrayal of the German character, or characters, if you count the ending. And Hitchcock says that the way he wanted it to come across was that the German character, regardless of the adversity, knew his destination, his goal. He was headstrong and he was trying to achieve it, whereas all of the other characters, all of the American characters, were all of differing political views, even though they should have been one big democracy, because, you know, Americans and all that. Because of their own individual views, they were all unable to work as one cohesive unit, or at least not until the end, where they kind of do. We'll talk about that at the end, of course. But that was his goal, and instead the critics were like, no, Hitchcock, you like the Germans. So, I don't know. After the fact, I think removing yourself from, you know, the 1940s, that sort of stuff, you don't even think about really that much without knowing the context. And I think the film works. I do. I know the characters get a lot of stick thrown at them for not being particularly likable, but there's a thing at the end, which I'll talk about, which I think justifies it, that they are basically all in survival mode, and they are acting realistically as how humans would survive and how they would act whilst trying to survive. And there's a certain thing at the end which I really liked, which I pointed out in my review on Letterboxd, which for me cements that it was all intentional. And yeah, let's just get into the film. It's Hitchcock's first like limited space film. He obviously did like Rope and Rear Window and stuff. This is the first of those kind, because yeah, it's entirely set on this one lifeboat. We see a ship funnel during the credits, and as soon as the credits end, the ship funnel sinks into the sea. I thought that was pretty cool. It was a pretty easy way of letting us know that a ship has sank, because then we pull across and we see the sea, and there's, you know, cards, there's boxes, there's a body floating face down. A passenger ship has been shot down, well, not shot down, has been sank in the middle of the sea, and all we see is Tallulah Bankhead's character, Connie, on this lifeboat. She's got all sorts of stuff with her, though. She's got her typewriter, she's got her camera. She's like a famous foreign correspondent. Way, she's a famous war correspondent, and she's covering the whole thing. She seems almost inhuman, because she's just filming everything and talking about how great these shots are, whilst there's literally bodies floating in the sea. She's very materialistic. She's well dressed. She's very well kept, and we very much find out how well kept she is, because John Kovac then manages to swim his way to the lifeboat, and he is covered in oil and soot and charcoal and blood and sweat. And he is a man who clearly was working on the ship. He wasn't a passenger. He was working. He actually says he was working there. And yeah, we find out that the ship was torpedoed by a German U-boat. And he is already kind of like, wow, you are very much up your own hole, woman. John Hodiak plays Kovacs. It's one of the biggest criticisms of the film is his performance is not very likable. But as I said, I don't think the characters need to be likable in a survival film. I know it's kind of hard to engage, but like, I don't know. Not everybody has to be likable. That's my personal opinion when it comes to survival films with a cast of like 10 people on a boat. Yes, he is like the male lead, so you kind of would want him to be like one of the more likable characters, but I thought his character development was interesting. I do think his performance is pretty lacking in range, and he is not like the charming douchebag. He's just a bit of a douchebag. Maybe that was lost in translation. Maybe he wasn't supposed to come across that way. And it is very much what most people's biggest critique is his performance. Kovac then helps another guy aboard, played by Hume Cronin, who is called Sparks, who was Herbie in Shadow of a Doubt. And we failed to point it out in Shadow of a Doubt that is Hume Cronin's first film appearance, is Shadow of a Doubt. And he's one of the main characters. And in this year, a year later, he does Lifeboat, but also gets an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Wow. Talk about exploding onto the scene. He is the Micah Richards of 1940s Hitchcock films, is Hume Cronin. He sparks. He manages to get to the lifeboat, and then they find C.J. Rittenhouse, who is friendly with Connie. He's a business owner himself. He was clearly another passenger. He is played by Henry Hull, who comes from like this family of actors in real life, and there's a couple of Oscar nominations in that family, I'm pretty sure. Alice Mackenzie and an injured Gus Smith board the ship. They are played by, and to kind of round things off then, it's Mrs. Higley, her baby, and Joe Spencer, who gets called a few things that aren't Joe Spencer until he does finally get called Joe Spencer, and I'm just going to call him Joe Spencer because that's his character's real name. No racial stereotyping here, guys. He's played by Canada Lee. Mrs. Higley is played by Heather Angel, who was Ethel in Suspicion, the housemaid in their big gaff that they had. And yeah, that's our survivors on the lifeboat for now. Because as they kind of get acquainted with each other and figure stuff out, Gus has got his injured leg. We've our two higher class people, or upper class people, should I say, in Connie and C.J. Rittenhouse, and then the rest of them are all. I'm pretty sure the rest of them are all people who were working on the ship, doing various different jobs, and then they pick up one last person, Willi, the German, and he's played by Walter Slezak, who was a pretty accomplished actor. Was in a few noirs. Was our Walter, and Connie, who speaks a bit of German, translates for him, basically saying, you guys also took out our U-boat, our submarine, so I'm the only survivor of that. So, mind if I stick around with you guys? He says he's not the captain or anything, he's just a crew member, and that's kind of why the guys are like, oh, right, okay, well, we'll help you aboard, except for Kovac and Gus for various reasons. Gus says his name isn't Gus Smith, it's Gus Schmidt, and because of that, he got a horrible time, so he had to change his name to Smith, so he hates the Germans. And Kovacs, on the other hand, is from the Czechoslovakia at the time, so he has all sorts of family ties to the war, and that's why he's very anti-German. And the rest of them, though, are like, no, we want you aboard, Mr. German, because that's the human thing to do, is to take you as a prisoner of war. So, there we go. We've already got a couple of ethical issues going on here on the boat. Also, Joe Spencer kind of finds out that he is also going to be treated equal, which, is good. Thank God. And then the baby dies. Yeah. Straight in there with the first death on the lifeboat. Mrs. Higley's baby dies. Straight away, we get a really good shot of Joe praying. He kind of steps into frame and he's praying. And the silence is deafening. There's no music at all really in this film. And that's because Hitchcock said, well, where would the audience think that the music was coming from in the middle of the sea? Which is a fair point. Someone also then said, well, where would the camera be coming from? But, it's a POV. It's a film, guys. Come on. Relax. Stop fighting. But yeah, this is one of those scenes where the silence is really apt. It's really cool. It's really well done because Joe just starts saying a prayer. We kind of learn that Joe is a more religious man and he's looking for his faith to kind of get him through this whole situation, which will be tested very much so. But the rest of the guys kind of take it upon themselves to bury the baby at sea, despite Mrs. Higley being unconscious, because as soon as she finds out that the baby's passed away, she passes out. So, they bury her baby at sea without consulting her. Kind of a strange choice, kind of a bad choice, kind of a morally questionable choice to do that to someone's baby without their consent. But here we are. So when she wakes up, Mrs. Higley, she has no recollection. She obviously went into shock as soon as she found out, and then she passed out. She has no recollection of this. So when she does find out that her baby isn't there, she starts saying, what did you guys do to my baby? What did you guys do to my baby? They say that your baby passed away. She is a freaker. She tries to find the baby, so they tie her to a chair. and they take it upon themselves because night is coming to do shifts watching her in the chair to make sure that, nothing happens to her. But the next morning, when everyone wakes up, she's dead. She has thrown herself overboard and drowned herself. And whoever it was, I think it was Rittenhouse's job to watch her, said, like, we're in the middle of the sea. There was literally no light. I had no idea if she was there or not, or if she was asleep or not. Which, you could have just asked her if she was there, and when she doesn't respond, assume the worst. But anyway, he actually even goes as far as to try and, like, put the blame on Joe, which just kind of gets swept under the rug. But, like, that was a pretty dickish thing to do. Oh, well, it might have been your watch, Joe, because you also did the watch. The characters aren't particularly likable, and as I said, that is because their natural survival instincts are coming out. But that being said, you can't help but get, like, annoyed at them. Like, it's purposeful. It's part of the film, which is why I'm not, like, taking it away from the film. But you have to point out that certain characters aren't likable and certain ones are at this point, and the unlikable ones are definitely talking more. Give Joe more dialogue. So after she has passed away, they kind of let her sink to the bottom of the sea, and they presume roles. They realize that the only way that they are all going to survive, because they have already lost 2 people and it's not even a full day yet, is if they all assume roles. And we also get the cool Hitchcock cameo. It's one of Hitchcock's favorite cameos, apparently, is Gus is reading the newspaper with his gammy leg, and on the back of the newspaper is like a weight loss thing. Apparently they are actual photos of Hitchcock before and after, because he went from 300 pounds to 200 pounds. So he wanted to congratulate himself on his weight loss by making it his cameo, because also, like, he said he wasn't going to be one of the survivors on the boat because he's not a very good actor, so he doesn't want any dialogue or anything. So that's fair enough. You could argue he could have been like a body floating in the sea or something, but this is way cooler. This is a really good cameo from Hitchcock. Their roles don't last very long until they realize that none of them are actually able to be the captain, because Sparks, who was Herbie in Shadow of a Doubt, he is a semi-accomplished man of the seas, shall we say. He's able to steer the boat and stuff, but his directional skills aren't great. Kovacs kind of makes himself the leader, because originally Rittenhouse makes himself the leader and gives people roles, and whenever Kovacs and the rest are like, who elected you the leader, Kovacs then elects himself the leader. So again, some questionable stuff from him. He's definitely up there for the hardest to like characters, which, him being the main character, again, people don't like that fact, but he declares himself leader until, again, that doesn't really work out either, and they realize that the German actually has the best directional skills. What are we going to do here, guys? Well, the German goes against Sparks' directions and says no. Bermuda, which is actually a non-German territory, so they're kind of hoping he will take them to Bermuda. He says, no, Bermuda isn't the way that Sparks is telling you, it's this way. And Sparks is like, well, I actually am not the best at direction, so he actually could be right, guys. So don't assume he's wrong. Kovacs says, no, he is wrong. He's German. He's going to take us to German territory. I'm in charge. I am the captain now. No way am I letting this happen. We're going to go the way that Sparks said. Even Sparks is kind of like, well, I don't know. The German also lets us all know, Willi, sorry, I've got to stop calling him the German. Willi lets us know that Gus's leg actually has gangrene and he needs to be amputated immediately or he'll die. And Kovac gets really annoyed at Gus because Gus doesn't want the amputation. He says his one true love at home, Rosie, will leave him if he gets the amputation, because all Rosie loves to do is dance. But Connie makes a good point of, well, if you think she's gonna leave you, does that mean you don't trust her? Do you really not trust the one true love's judgment? And also, Kovacs is like, what kind of a woman would she be if she just left you because you had one leg? Like, she's clearly not all that if she leaves you. The moral of the story is, fuck Al Magaruni. Because, yeah, Gus is convinced that this guy called Al Magaruni is gonna steal his missus if he has one leg, and everybody's like, yeah, fuck Al Magaruni. And then they decide to amputate. They get Gus really drunk on a bottle of brandy that they have, and then they do it. They do the amputation because Willi, the German man, was allegedly a surgeon before the war, so he's able to do the amputation. And it's a pretty great shot where we find out how it all unfolds, because everybody kind of goes around Gus and they huddle around him, and then Kovacs takes his boot from his amputated leg and throws it across the boat because he doesn't need it anymore. The amputation has happened. After the amputation, which Willi has completed, he then lets us all know that we are still going the wrong direction and we are just drifting out to sea. So at this point now, only Gus and his one leg and drunkenness supports Kovacs as the leader. So Kovacs finally, in a good moment for the character, relents and is like, okay, do you know what, guys? Maybe I'm not all that. Let's let Willi dictate where we're going, because he knows more than Sparks when it comes to directions, and he clearly knows more than me when it comes to leading a boat. So Willi is taking them to Bermuda. Or is he? Because we also then find out that he has a compass and has had a compass the whole time. He knows exactly where he's going. We get a bit of character development from Alice Mackenzie, who up to this point has basically just been there to treat Gus's wounds. She says that she had an affair with a married man and she feels very guilty. And Sparks is like, oh, well, that's not ideal. But then he realizes, through where the different planets are during this conversation, that Willi has actually totally changed their course. And everybody's asleep except these two. They're having this moment, but it's really there for the moment of Sparks realizing, hang on, Venus and Mars were here when we were going to Bermuda, but now they're all the way over here. He's taking us a totally different direction to what he said he was. Where is he taking us? He alerts everyone to this, and he says, isn't it also funny how he has a pocket watch, but he keeps asking people for the time? Or he asked someone for the time, but he has a pocket watch. Maybe that pocket watch is actually a compass. And they all deduced it. Yeah, no, something's fishy. We got to find it out. What's up with this guy and his pocket watch? So they all turn to Joe, the African-American character, to rob him. Yeah, I can see why the NAACP weren't huge on this character. And he successfully robs him. What can you say? It's a 40s film. It's dated. Some clear, stupid racial stereotyping, and we'll just move on from it. But you gotta recognize it. And then what proceeds all happens quite fast. So Joe realizes that the pocket watch is in fact a compass. Kovacs is like, we gotta execute this guy. We gotta take him out. He is clearly taking us to German territory. Then all of a sudden the waves get like insane and smash the boat around. Looks like we're all gonna die, or at least half of them are gonna die. It looks like they're all gonna drown. And then all of a sudden Willi, in perfect English, starts giving them orders and barking orders at them. As it looks like the ship is gonna sink and they're all gonna die, Kovacs and Connie embrace and kiss despite hating each other up until this point. And then after a unknown period of time, a period of time long enough that some people look a lot worse and some people have grown facial hair, we have now a totally different chain of command on the boat. The situation is now this. Willi, who somehow has an insane amount of endurance and strength, is now rowing the boat towards German territory because it is the closest territory, and if they don't go there, they're all gonna die. Gus is hallucinating. He is so thirsty. His leg is amputated. He looks awful. He's sunburnt, and he keeps like losing consciousness and talking to Rosie, who's obviously not there. His other half at home, who he didn't marry, and that's one of his big issues as well, as I didn't marry her, so what if she does just leave me? Sparks and Mackenzie are basically like together now, and they're, cuddling on the boat, as are Connie and Kovacs. and they get into a conversation about how, despite them being totally different classes, they actually had the same upbringing. They're both from Chicago. He sees her bracelet. It's a Cartier bracelet. It's clearly worth a lot of money. He is really taken aback by it. I don't think he quite likes it. And he also makes a deck of cards, which him and Rittenhouse keep playing cards. Also, Joe is there. He's just kind of not talking. Unfortunately, he's like the best, or at least the most likable character in the film. I wouldn't go as far as to call him the best, but he's definitely the most likable. Kovacs gives us this big monologue about how he hates the rich, and he hates the upper class, and all of this, and he rejects Connie, and he goes over to play some more cards with CJ Rittenhouse. Everybody starts snapping at each other, and then all of a sudden, because they've clearly gone through a dry patch where everyone's sunburnt, and particularly Gus is like so thirsty, it starts to rain, and everybody is happy again. Until the rain only lasts a matter of seconds and goes away again. And Gus basically psychologically just snaps at this point. He just starts deliriously talking to Joe, who's asleep now. He's talking to Rosie. He's daydreaming. He's talking about going to the ball game. He's lost his marbles. Everybody's just basically ignoring him. And then he spots that Willi has actually had a bottle of water the whole time and is drinking it. And nobody listens to him whenever he says that he has water. So he goes over to Willi and he quite desperately just says, "Why didn't you share the water? Like, why? What are you doing?" And Willi tricks him into saying basically like, "Oh, don't bother telling anyone because like they need their rest. They're all asleep. They need their rest." And most Gus is all conflicted. Willi pushes him overboard and then paddles away as fast as he can, and Gus drowns. Yeah, pretty bleak one, that. When everyone wakes up and realizes that Gus has gone overboard, they all start questioning Willi because he was the only guy awake. And then Willi starts to sweat. And you can only produce sweat if you have water in your system. So they deduce, yep, he's got water. And not only does he have water, but he was saying, I am, the superior race. It's actually because he had water, he had vitamins, he had energy tablets, he had food tablets, and he wasn't telling anyone. So what do? They murder him. They batter him, they throw him overboard, and they drown him. And that's the end of Willi. Yes, this film is taking a very, very dark turn. After they do this, CJ Rittenhouse gives up. Joe is still praying to God. He still believes his faith will help him survive. Sparks actually proposes to Mackenzie, and she says yes. So they're going to get married. It's all kind of breaking down. And then Connie, after losing all her material goods throughout the film, she loses her typewriter, she loses her camera. She scathes them all for quitting, and she says, "We'll use my Cartier bracelet, which costs all the money in the world, as bait, and we're going to start fishing." Which, she could have done far sooner, but hey, she's finally willing to let go of the Cartier bracelet to let everyone else survive. So they go fishing, they catch a fish, and then they see a ship in the distance, and they get overexcited, and they lose the fish and the bracelet in the process. Then it turns out that ship is a German ship. So now they've no food, they've no Cartier bracelet, they've no Gus, they've no Willi, they've no Mrs. Higley, they've no baby, they've no food, they've no water, and the Germans are coming. That ship then just takes fire, it starts getting blasted all the way to hell, blows up. We get a cool shot of one of the lifeboats of the German ship just getting hit by like a cannonball almost and just exploding in the sea. It's absolute carnage, it's chaos. The ship gets absolutely decimated, and everybody's happy because they see that their allies are on the way to save them. And what I was saying earlier about the characters all being in survival mode and being unlikable, it's cool that only when they see the ship coming to save them that they start to actually get to know each other on a personal level. So the characters who we saw throughout the film aren't what they're normally like on day-to-day living. That's them in survival mode. It's as soon as they see the ship that's coming to save them that Joe starts telling them about his family and that he's a married man, and Rittenhouse is all like polite to people, and Sparks and Mackenzie get to know each other on a personal level despite them agreeing to get engaged. She finds out his actual name. It's not just Sparks. And then someone climbs aboard. Well, his hands appear on the boat. They help him up. And he's German. He's a young German, though. He's a very young man. And they're like, oh, God, not this again. But he's young, so they're like, no, we can't do this to a young man. Willi was a man in like his 40s. This is like a child. And the German kid pulls a gun on them. And they're like, oh, God, what do we do? And then when they take the gun off him and he says, well, aren't you going to kill me? That's when they're like, right, okay, no. Civilization, guys. We're not just going to murder this guy like we murdered Willi. And that's it. That's where the film ends. Did that feel kind of abrupt? Sorta, a little bit, yeah. It was like pretty powerful with the second German character coming aboard and them deciding not to kill him. But like Rittenhouse's character, who was like originally the guy who was opposed to killing Willi, was the first one to try and kill this guy. So everybody's been shaped by this experience, and that's clearly one of Hitchcock's ways of letting us know that, you know, they've all just gotten to know each other on a civil level, and as soon as they're back into a bit of chaos, Rittenhouse in particular is just straight back into survival tactics. That was pretty interesting. And that was Lifeboat. All in all, I think it is a good film. It's an underrated Hitchcock film for, you know, it was a box office failure. It wasn't really advertised. It doesn't get talked about an awful lot. It's, you know, Hitchcock's first all-in-one location film. It's not really got any mega stars as far as Hitchcock films go. I know Tallulah Bankhead was like a big deal at the time on like the stage, but if we're talking like film history, there's no mega stars here. So I can see why it gets like swept under the greatness of Hitchcock and Hitchcock's highest of highs. I do think it's, again, we seem to cover these a lot on the podcast. It's definitely like upper mid-tier Hitchcock. I'd rate it a 3.5 out of 5, a 7 out of 10 if you will. So, you know, same rating as the likes of Foreign Correspondent and Saboteur for me anyway. I know Shane didn't like it as much, but as far as I'm aware, the general consensus is around that. I know a few people who I follow and a lot of people on Letterboxd do kind of rate it around that. So, yeah, it's a pretty well-received film in this day and age. It's certainly not Hitchcock's best work, but it's definitely a good film. It's worth watching. It's an interesting film. It's a survival film at the end of the day, and Hitchcock didn't do many like straight up survival films, if any. So it's a cool one in Hitchcock's filmography. Definitely, it definitely feels unique, and I think it is worth the watch. If you haven't seen it, I would go watch Lifeboat. Although you now know how the whole film goes. So thank you very much. And so yeah, as far as Spellbound goes, we'll probably cover Spellbound next week. I'll just see. I don't really know what's going to happen with the podcast next week. All I can tell you is there will be an episode. It won't be one of the Euros episodes because by the time the votes and stuff come in and we get to the semi-finals, as we said, all the semi-final films will be covered on the podcast. We won't actually be at the semi-final stage yet for it to be a Euros film next week. If there's no Shane, we'll make a decision as to whether or not it's Spellbound. I might try and get another guest on the podcast, or we'll just see what happens. I might get a guest on to cover Spellbound. Who knows? In the meantime, thank you very much for watching and or listening. Please like the podcast. Please subscribe on YouTube if you're not subscribed. Comments are majorly appreciated on YouTube, and reviews are massively appreciated on Spotify or wherever it is you listen to your Spotifys. Just not Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you. Goodbye.